I've spent the last 5 years traveling all over the world. I immersed myself in the beautiful language and culture of Latin America. I went and rediscovered my roots back in Asia, and I've marveled at the rich history of Europe. After all of my travels, I can confidently say that I am never moving back to the United States. Let me explain. I've made several videos like this before, but that was before I went to Asia and Europe, and now spending some time here in Europe, I feel like this is the place that I really want to be. Now, I think it's important to say that I was very lucky to be born an American. Having a US passport gives you so many privileges around the world, and I don't think that can be understated. There's a reason why everybody wants to move to the United States because of all the benefits it provides. I think the American dream was alive maybe around 30-40 years ago when my parents first came to the US, but it's quite a complicated situation now. I think it's clear to everybody that the US is on a decline. The main draw of the US is greater financial opportunity, and this is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. There's a mentality with many people around the world that they want to go to America, try to make as much money as they can, and then come back to their home country or give money back to their family. Because of the capitalist drive of America, the country prioritizes business and money over the well-being of its citizens. And there are several examples for that. University, which I believe in the US is a total scam. I remember growing up where we were sold this lie of university. That's just the thing to do. You go to uni and afterwards you are guaranteed a high-paying job. It doesn't really matter about the student debt that you're going to accumulate. Now that I've graduated and I see that the whole entire system is a scam, it's ridiculous the price that we pay for not really an education, because college used to be about teaching you how to critical think, especially because I went to a liberal arts school. I feel like they focus a lot more on the politics and teaching me what to think instead of teaching me how to properly think for myself. And as I've been able to explore the world and see the world from different perspectives, it's really made me question everything that was taught to me in the US. For example, all the propaganda that is fed to us about Muslims, about China, about Russia, about Ukraine. When I was in the US, I used to believe that all Muslims were violent people and all these bad things, but when I finally met Muslims in real life, it was completely different to the image that was portrayed to me from the West. If you look online about Ukraine, all you'll see is that it's constantly in war, everything's being destroyed. But when I went to go see Ukraine for myself, it was an amazing experience. It was one of the best countries that I've ever visited, but it was not what I expected at all. Seeing how different it is to the way that they're being portrayed to us, it just makes me think, if they're lying to us about these things, what else could they be lying to us about? Everything in the US is about money, sacrifices everything for money. And if that's your main goal, then America is great for you. But if you value other things over money, then America is probably the worst place that you can be in. Let's take another example. Let's take the healthcare system. Healthcare in the US is so incredibly up. I can't believe that this system has been going on for so long. Once you go to another country and you get a surgery done or you get medicine, you reach for your pocket expecting to pay a lot, and it's like 1/4 of the price than it is in America without all the complicated steps of insurance. You think to yourself, what the heck am I paying all this money for? And I think because healthcare is so expensive in the US, people are so afraid to go to the hospital or call an ambulance because even step foot into the ambulance, just the bill from that is going to be thousands of dollars. Whereas in many places around the world, the ambulances are free because healthcare and the well-being of its citizens are very important. Thankfully, I'm still young, so I don't really have to experience all of these problems, but I can understand how people who are older, experiencing a lot of health issues, feel trapped in the US because if they don't have their job, if they don't have their insurance, the amount of money that they're going to have to pay for everything is just ridiculous. And I really like how many countries in Europe do healthcare. In certain parts of Southeast Asia, for example, in Malaysia, the healthcare system is really good. And even when I was in Colombia, I was covered under my ex-wife, and I was so surprised of how little I paid for everything. And it's really upsetting seeing how the US screws us when it comes to healthcare. If you guys are enjoying this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. Have you guys noticed that there's like a weird uptick in gambling sites? Every time I'm on Instagram or watching something about the NBA, everybody's promoting DraftKings or all of these gambling websites. And I'm just like, why are these companies pushing the common citizen to gamble so much? And the only reason that I can think of is because it's an extremely profitable business. To me, that's such a out value. I've seen such an increase of it in the last few years that's made me kind of turned off by watching sports. And even when I think about social issues, right? Like the whole body positivity movement or how all these companies are supporting Pride Month, right? They're only doing this for the money and so they can virtue signal to the public that they are doing well. But none of these companies care. They're only doing it for money, which goes back to the original point that everything in the US is about money. Have you ever wondered why the US has no good public transportation? This is something I think about every time I go to Europe because European cities are hundreds of years old and they've been able to create these crazy metro systems under these buildings and these cities that have been around for centuries. But in the US, we're a relatively young country, but we still can't figure out a way to have a good public transportation system. But the reason that it's like this is because back in the day, the car companies lobbied for the US making things around cars instead of public transportation. I enjoy driving, don't get me wrong, but it's very relaxing not having to worry about my car and having to worry about all the expenses and responsibilities that come with it. I remember when I was in my 20s and still struggling trying to make it out of the mud, a lot of my expenses were towards gas, my insurance, maintenance in the car, and if I were to get into an accident or something bad were to happen to the car, I would be screwed because it would be so expensive. And it's so nice being in European cities, being able to walk around everywhere just by bike or public transportation. Most of these cities you can actually just walk around. It leads to an overall better mental health and physical health, which leads me to my next point. The obesity issue in the US is getting out of control, and I think it's two main factors. One, poor quality of food, and two, this acceptance that being obese is okay and nobody can say anything to you. Asians are ruthless when it comes to you being fat. It's funny and it's kind of a joke, and I know a lot of people complain about how it can be rude sometimes. To a certain extent, all of this societal shaming works, and that's why Asians in general, especially from the motherland, are always fit or slim, or we're not really obese like that. Yes, it is also because of the diet and maybe our genetics, but the society doesn't promote that. I don't know about you guys, right? As a man, I don't want to be with a woman who weighs more than I do. I think that's quite unacceptable. And the US has normalized this mentality where it doesn't matter how big people get, you can't say anything, even though we all know that it's very, very unhealthy. But on top of the whole body positivity movement, which I think is total the quality of the food in the US is so low, and it almost feels like they purposely make the food bad so they can sell you more organic food, which is double the cost of the regular food you can buy at the supermarket. The US has so much processing, you have to eat a lot more food in order to get full, and that's why it's quite common for people, once they go to the US, they just gain weight out of nowhere. So that, coupled with having to drive everywhere and not really walking, all these things combined makes the population more obese. So even the food has a money edge to it, where these companies prioritize making more money off of crappy food rather than giving us good, healthy food that we need to survive. The women in other places around the world are just better. So there's this common stereotype about American women is that they demand the most and they offer the least. And that's why the whole meme of Karens exists. Everybody knows around the world that women are valued for their beauty. And just something as basic as staying in shape is so difficult to ask for Americans in general. But on top of that, the expectation for what a man is supposed to do seems to be extremely high, while simultaneously there's this mindset that men are the enemy. I think a lot of men feel this when you go to other countries. In the US, acting on my masculine instincts will get me labeled as misogynist or toxically masculine or could get me canceled, right? But when I go to other countries in the world, like when I was in Colombia or Asia or even here, right? It feels like, yes, the feminist movement is rising, but there's still a healthy appreciation for men and what the men contribute to society. And this whole mentality of like, we don't need men ain't I've seen it with so many of my friends growing up in college. First off, I've seen it with my sister and her friends and their mentality. It's a very stark difference speaking with American women versus women anywhere in the world. So even though it would make the most sense for me to marry somebody who's American or Asian American, right? I don't like what the overall culture turns people into, both the men and women. And it's just not a culture that I personally would like to be a part of. I also really enjoy having conversations specifically with Europeans. It feels like they are a lot more knowledgeable about the world and a lot more cultured. It's very common to meet people overseas that speak multiple languages, their home language, English, maybe a third language. And the main reason for that is because Europe has so many different countries. The people here have to pay attention to what's going on in their neighboring countries. Whereas in the US, when we look outside our house, we just see America. So it's kind of like we're in this small bubble. And because we're geographically isolated from everybody too, all we really see about the world is what the news gives us. And after exploring the world for myself, and I realized a lot of the things that you see on the news is complete bullshit. And for as much as people like to talk about, Russian propaganda, Chinese propaganda, the US has their own form of propaganda as well. And as you learn about different countries and cultures and how other people do things, I think Europeans and Asians have learned to coexist with other countries in harmony because they are so close to each other. It gives a higher incentive for these countries to have a more diplomatic and peaceful mindset rather than the US, where they just believe that they're the world police. They go start wars in a bunch of countries. The US likes to use its military to bully other people into submission. It's all under the guise of freedom. Because the US is so focused on itself, I think it's fostered this individual over society mentality. Now, this is really great on paper, being able to be whoever you want to be and go out and be free. But I don't think you can properly run a society if everybody's just focused on themselves over the general well-being of their neighbor. And this is something that you see a lot in Europe and a lot of places in Asia because we are generally more homogenous societies, and the overall societal values is all about safety and peace. The US culture promotes this behavior of being very entitled and thinking that I'm the center of the universe. And I think you can see that in the politics, but you can also see that in the behavior of the people. That's why Americans also have a reputation of being very rude tourists all around the world. This is why there's so much chaos in the US when it comes to politics and just overall social fabric, because if you're prioritizing yourself, who's right? Which values do we follow? If you're so focused on trying to be acceptant of everybody, then you don't stand for anything. And this is what I think is going to be the biggest downfall of the US, because there's no one real value or culture that really unites us, other than the idea of, I guess, freedom, which I honestly don't even think is true. When I was in the US, I was so scared of being pulled over by the police for whatever reason, and I actually felt like I lived a much more restrictive lifestyle over there because of finances, because of all the rules and all the laws. So this whole entire idea and concept of freedom, I feel like, is kind of a mirage. And to be honest, to me, real freedom is being able to make a livable wage, not having to worry about healthcare or paying off an exorbitant amount of debt, and having a good work-life balance where you can choose what to do with your time. High priority on family and friends and social life. And it feels like everything in the US is all centered around working. This is a common value shared in a lot of Asian countries, because in a place, for example, like Vietnam, they work a lot, but I still think they have a good work-life balance and they still make a lot of time for their friends and their social circle and their family. And it feels like in the US, everything is just about work. We live to work. Everything revolves around work. Feels like you're constantly on this rat race and the hamster wheel of trying to make money so you can get a job or promotion, so you can pay for your bills, and then your bills go higher so then you get a higher job, and it's just this constant grind. I really like how in a lot of places in Europe, the middle class is a lot wider. You don't need a lot of money to live a comfortable life here. I would love to be wealthy one day. Money is great, of course, but it's not the highest priority for me. And that's not my main goal of trying to be as rich as possible. I just really want enough to live a nice, comfortable life. And I think in many places around the world, they also share that mentality. I think the glory days of the US were probably around 20, 30 years ago, because I remember growing up in the 90s and the 2000s and how the American dream was still alive. The movies were great. I don't know, just the overall environment in America was amazing. But the way that the last 20 years, how it's progressed, how everything's gotten a lot more woke and liberal, it just kind of seems like a mess now, especially our politics, and I didn't even really talk about that. I'm very comfortable here in Europe. I think I'm gonna eventually settle down here, either here or in Spain. But at this point in my life, I'm quite confident that I am never returning to the United States. If you guys wanna reach out to me for whatever reason, feel free to contact me here. Let me know what you guys think down below. Cheers.